You find an old report card in a box. The teacher wrote, "Very bright, but does not apply himself." Maybe there is another note about talking too much, forgetting homework, staring out the window, rushing through the easy parts and somehow never finishing the last page. And suddenly, 40 years later, the whole thing reads differently. Not because every distracted Gen X kid had ADHD. They did not. But many adults who eventually received an ADHD diagnosis grew up in a time when the people around them were looking for a much narrower version of it, usually a boy, usually bouncing off the walls, usually causing enough trouble that no one could ignore him. If you were quiet, funny, smart, anxious, helpful, or just extremely good at improvising, you could disappear in plain sight. You did not look like a medical mystery. You looked careless. The strange part is how many of those childhood habits can follow someone into adulthood while wearing completely different clothes. The kid who forgot permission slips becomes the adult who pays a bill, puts the stamp beside the envelope, and then discovers the envelope 3 weeks later under a grocery receipt. The kid who waited until Sunday night to build the entire science project becomes the adult who cleans the garage at midnight because guests are coming tomorrow. The kid who could focus for 6 hours on one interesting thing but not 6 minutes on a worksheet becomes the adult with 14 browser tabs, 3 hobbies, and a very intense 2-week relationship with bread making. That can look inconsistent. It can also look lazy. For many Gen X kids, those were the explanations available. ADHD was not completely unknown, but the modern picture was still being assembled while Gen X was growing up. In 1980, the American Psychiatric Association published the 3rd edition of its diagnostic manual and used the term attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity. In 1987, the revised manual brought the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder into wider clinical use. That means some older Gen X children were already teenagers before the label itself began to resemble the one people know today. The category existed. The understanding was still changing. And outside specialist offices, the public picture was even simpler. Hyper meant hyper. If you could sit still, you were probably fine. If you earned decent grades, you were definitely fine. If you were a girl who daydreamed, overprepared, talked non-stop with friends, or quietly lost track of everything, you might be described as scattered, sensitive, dramatic, or not living up to your potential. Psychologist Stephen Hinshaw has spent decades studying ADHD in girls and women. His work helped show why many girls were easier to miss. They were more likely to show inattentive problems and less likely to create the disruptive behavior that triggered referrals. In other words, the child who interrupted the entire class got attention. The child who silently missed half the lesson often got another reminder to try harder. That difference mattered. So did the culture surrounding Gen X childhood. A lot of kids had long stretches without close adult supervision. They carried house keys. They walked home. They made snacks. They handled small emergencies. They were expected to remember what needed doing and deal with the consequences when they did not. For many children, that built real confidence. For a child struggling with attention, organization, or impulse control, it could also build an impressive collection of emergency systems. Put the key on a shoelace. Leave the homework directly in front of the door. Write the phone number on your hand. Agree to everything immediately so no one notices you forgot the first instruction. Make people laugh before they can get annoyed. Become the helpful kid. Become the gifted kid. Become the kid who works best under pressure, which is a flattering way of saying nothing starts until the pressure becomes physically visible. These strategies could work surprisingly well. That was part of the problem. A child can compensate for years, especially when life is structured by bells, parents, teachers, sports, and the fear of being embarrassed. Then adulthood removes the rails. Now nobody checks whether the form came home. Nobody rings a bell when it is time to switch tasks. The laundry does not lower your grade. It simply becomes a chair. Bills do not give encouraging feedback. They charge late fees, and the adult who seemed capable can begin wondering why ordinary life requires so much last-minute rescue. The National Institute of Mental Health explains that ADHD involves persistent patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity that interfere across more than one part of life. That word, persistent, matters. Everybody loses keys. Everybody procrastinates. Everybody walks into a room and forgets why. ADHD is not one funny habit. It is a broader pattern that begins in childhood and creates real difficulty. That is also why a video cannot tell anyone whether they have it. Sleep problems, anxiety, depression, stress, learning differences, medical conditions, and plain old overload can produce similar struggles. A proper evaluation looks at history, impairment, other possible explanations, and what was happening long before social media started diagnosing everyone through kitchen cleaning videos. Still, late recognition is not rare. A 2023 national survey reported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimated that 15.5 million American adults had a current ADHD diagnosis. More than half said they had first been diagnosed as adults. That does not prove Gen X was uniquely overlooked. It does show that reaching adulthood without a diagnosis is hardly unusual. For some Gen X adults, the realization arrives through their children. A teacher describes time blindness, working memory problems, or inattentive ADHD, and the parent sits there thinking, "That is a disorder. I thought that was our family system." Suddenly, the unexplained pieces start forming a pattern. The report cards, the abandoned planners, the panic cleaning, the missed appointments followed by elaborate apology speeches, the ability to solve a crisis with calm precision, paired with the inability to schedule a dentist appointment before the tooth develops its own personality. The point is not to turn every quirk into a symptom. The point is that behavior once treated as a character flaw may deserve a more accurate question. Instead of, "Why am I like this?" try, "What keeps breaking down here?" Is it remembering, starting, switching, estimating time, keeping an uninteresting task active in your mind when 17 more interesting things are standing nearby waving? That question is useful whether the answer is ADHD or not. It moves the problem out of the moral courtroom and into the workshop. Maybe the answer is an evaluation. Maybe it is better. Sleep, fewer commitments, visible reminders, a basket where the mail actually lands, or admitting that a system requiring you to remember something later is not a system. The useful shift is smaller than a personality makeover. Stop demanding that memory do the job of a calendar. Stop hiding every unfinished task in a cabinet and then acting surprised when the cabinet becomes a geological formation. Make the next step visible. Make it easier to begin. And when possible, add structure before the emergency supplies the structure for you. For many Gen X adults, that can feel almost suspiciously gentle. They grew up hearing that capable people handle things themselves. But understanding a pattern is not making an excuse. It is finally using the right instruction manual. So when you find that old report card in red, very bright, but does not apply himself, you may still laugh. You may even agree with parts of it. But now you can see what the teacher could not. Sometimes the child was not refusing to apply himself. Sometimes everyone was simply looking for the wrong kid.